Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Tonight we will be discussing a couple of concepts. We always discuss concepts like reality and truth, war and peace. We discuss economics, we discuss politics, we discuss very much everything that we are up to discussing. Tonight, we will discuss the concept of hate. How do we start hating on somebody or someone or a group of people? How do we start hating? And as you know, hate grows much, much faster than love, actually. Love, it takes a while to actually love a person, but it doesn't take long to hate a person. And it does not take much for that hate to actually grows inside of you, where you are actually able to transform some of that hate into other people. And it's like cancer. It spreads, and it spreads fast. Now, when we're talking about hate or hating, people that do things to you is one thing, but when you start hating someone that did not do anything to you, just because one of your friends told you that person is not good, or that person did this, or that person is ugly, or that person whatever, then you start hating that person. Now, what about if the society starts teaching each other? And what about if the society actually starts teaching itself or being educated to hate another society, another people, for whatever reason? There's many, many reasons that people are hating each other for. You can find so many reasons to hate others. Maybe they're different color. Maybe they talk different than you. Maybe they are different religion. Maybe they go to different church than you. Maybe they work someplace where you had a very bad experience. And then there are those kinds of hate that is organized hate. Some of this organized hate is when you have a whole society, or the majority of that society starts hating another society. Now, most of the times those things do happen with the education that we are getting, and the kind of education we get, basically we get it through the media. We get it through schools, we get it through churches, we get it through friends, we get it through the movies, we get it through, there are so many modems that you get your information from. But most of the times that information has like one way going in, and you don't have a chance or a choice in choosing what information you want coming into your brains. You just have a directed beam being beamed into your head by someone that has designed that influence and designed the effect that they want to have on you. Now, I'm talking about people in countries like the United States hating other people in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan and other people around the world who are different than them in religion, different than them in language, different than them the way they look, the way they dress, the way they talk. So everything is different, and it's so easy to hate people who are different because we don't know, they look different than us. They look weird in your standard. They look like they're vicious in your standards, of course. They look mad, they look upset, they look this and they look that. So, when you think of Muslims, even though Muslims around the world, they dress up like everybody else around the world. Many Muslims in Muslim countries dress up like many. As a matter of fact, most Muslims around the world, they don't dress like the Muslims that you are seeing. But we're not saying that these Muslims are dressed in a weird way. No. This attire that you have seen is basically, it's been going on. People have been dressing up like that for thousands of years. It's not like when Islam came to countries like Pakistan or Afghanistan that made them dress up differently, or India or Indonesia, or because many other countries in Asia, they dress up very much close to that, and they're not Muslims, and Islam never reached them as some of these countries not considered to be a Muslim country. But so why do we hate people who look like that? Well, because most of the images that we have seen on television, most of the images that these commentators and, subconsciously or consciously, you watch TV and you hear someone talking, and then all of a sudden they start throwing images at you. Well, you're listening to them talking, but those images are going through your head like a beam of light, and it's going directly into your subconscious, and you start hating people who look like that. Because most of the people that you have seen on television since 9/11, people who are dressed up like that, basically. You see them on the battlefield and you think that's their military uniform or something. No, that's just how people dress up in those countries. Now, in other countries, they dress up differently. In Arab countries, for instance, they dress up different than they do in Afghanistan and Pakistan and India and Indonesia and etc., etc. Muslims in Western countries, they dress up like Westerners. This is like, a Western dress. This is not an Arab dress. This is a Western dress or attire. So, but why is it? Why is it that people in the United States, consciously, subconsciously, it's the fad, it's the norm, everybody has been, and I'm not talking about everybody, but you have to understand. Now, if someone says terrorist, the image of a terrorist in your head, and all of you will have one image of what a terrorist is. If someone says the enemy, probably 20, 30 years ago, it used to be a Russian guard or something. It was never a Muslim. Before 9/11, you did not know the difference between a Muslim imam and a Buddhist monk. You had no clue who these people are. And all of a sudden, 9/11 gets here, and all of a sudden you hate Muslims. And for the last 10 or 11 years, you have been bombarded by people who are telling you that these people are different. Now, I remember early on in this process of indoctrinating you, there was a book called The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington. And, we've talked about this book when it first came out, actually. And this book very much, it said that after the fall of the Soviet Union, then the powers in the world are going to be very much fighting, or the next war is going to be a war of civilization. Now, Samuel Huntington, his theory was, and we're going to hear from him, and you will listen to what he said, and then we are going to, actually we have, a couple of videos that we're going to play for you. The first one is going to be Samuel Huntington, basing his theory of the clash of civilization. Because if we look at it now, after the fact, and then you go back and read his book, you might think, you know what? Yeah, he's probably right. But why? When this hate, actually, it was manufactured after Samuel Huntington wrote his book. The current situation, what is going on between, let's say, the United States or the people in the United States. Because when you hear the official version of what is going on, then they'll tell you, oh, no, 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 we're not at war with Muslims or Islam. No, no, not at all. That's what the government says. Oh, no, we are at war with Al-Qaeda. That doesn't even exist. And we are at war with terrorism. Very vague concept that we don't even know the definition of terrorism. You know, what is terrorism? You know, taking an F-18 and bombing an apartment building, killing 1,500 people in one shot, that's collateral damage because the one who did it was flying an airplane. Or if somebody blows himself up and kills, 50 people. Well, okay, now you're going to say that people who go in uniform and kill other people, that's okay. That is an army. That is an official army. But people who happen to defend themselves against an official army, if that's the definition, that an army can kill but people cannot defend themselves, like what is going on in Palestine, for instance. May 15th actually was the 64th anniversary of what is known as the Palestinian catastrophe. That's when Israel was established 64 years ago over a land that did not belong to it. And over 64 years, now the Palestinians have suffered and endured a military occupation where the military regime goes and kill Palestinians and no one can say anything to them. They terrorize people. If you've been watching this show, you know we have covered a lot of that. But when a Palestinian throws a rock at an Israeli soldier, then that's terrorism. So I think we need to first define what terrorism is. But let's get back to the subject we are talking about, which is hate. How did you develop this hate against Muslim people? Because you cannot tell me that when you think of your enemies, you're going to think of Muslims. You're going to think of the images that we had shown you. Well, how did you get here? It wasn't Samuel Huntington who got you here. Samuel Huntington said, hey, look, there's nothing else people that are going to fight about except civilizations. Different people, different civilizations, different concepts of how to live. Now, is that true? Hasn't this life and this earth been for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years actually been populated by different civilizations, different people, regrouping of people, and the civilizations come and civilization goes, just like a man. A man is born, then he becomes strong, then he becomes weak, then he dies. The same thing happens to all civilizations. I don't care what civilization, it started being an infant, then a toddler, then it walked, then very much it grew, became strong, then became weaker and weaker and weaker. There are many civilizations throughout history that this cycle of life actually happened or took place. So, but how did you get here? How did you get to hate as many people who did not do you any harm? Do you want to say, well, 9/11? No, let's investigate 9/11 first. Let's not even go there. Since 9/11, even though the United States military have been fighting for over 11 years now, we haven't seen really any attack on the United States except the ones that agents, we talked about this last time, either CIA or FBI or whatever, actually commit. So let's not get into that details. Let's stick to the subject at hand, which is basically, how did you get here? Well, you got here. Doesn't matter how And it doesn't matter what you do. You know, it's not because you listen to Sean Hannity, and it's not because you listen to Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and the rest of the wackos with Fox, etc. And you could be watching sports. You could be watching a comedy. You could be watching any series on television. They always manage to squeeze in. You know, I remember when I was little, we used to watch war movies, and it's always, you know, the bad guys were always Germans, and the good guys were always Americans. And, you know, Germans spoke with this, you know, accent, even though many of them spoke very good English, and they were actually with an American accent. But no, when you bring, when you see those German soldiers, normally with an accent that's going to irritate the heck out of you, well, that's how you develop your hate towards other people. You know, they're going to bring somebody who is dressed up different than you, who is talking a language or speaking your language with an accent that is irritating you, so you start hating on that person. And so now in all movies and televisions, etc., what you see is Muslims are the bad guys. You know, it doesn't matter if you're watching comedy, there's always a joke about bin Laden, about a Muslim, about 72 virgins, about someone blowing up himself. And it's a joke, you know, you don't think of it as anything else but a joke, and you laugh at it. But your subconscious doesn't know. Or you watch a movie, and the terrorists are the bad guys, they're Muslims. You know, you're watching the movie, and you're really into the movie, and your subconscious is recording all those images as if it's real. Your subconscious doesn't understand that you are watching a movie. Your subconscious understands that you are taking in information. Now, consciously you know that you are watching a movie, but your inner brain doesn't know that you are watching a movie. Okay? I don't want any psychiatrist or psychology majors calling me and saying, nah, well, that theory is not. No, that theory is 100% correct. And and then you see it everywhere, bits and pieces, bits and pieces. And then you develop this subconscious hate and identification, because you have to identify with the society and with your surroundings. You cannot, I mean, look, if we tell you, and we have been telling you, that what the United States have done in other countries is wrong, because in many cases it was acting on behalf of another government and the interest of another country, i.e. Israel. But if we tell you this, what are you going to do? Are you going to hate the United States military? Of course not. And you're not supposed to, because this is the military that you identify with as your protector, and you should. And it should be the protector. So you're not going to identify any other way with the military or with the government. That's basically the only government we have. We look at the government to protect us. So we're not going to believe that our government is going to deceive us. No, those people who are saying this, you know, they know that the fear factor is going to play a lot in your decision of to go along with your surroundings. If your community, if your local television is, you know, they go and they cover the troops leaving and their families, and they cover the troops coming back and their families, how are you going to feel but to support? And you should. I'm not saying you should not. You should. But also, you should be a human being who will take a moment and see if the information he's getting makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, investigate it. If enough of us out there start doing this, then we will start questioning a lot. Then it'll be a majority. Then the surroundings, the main thing that those people who are indoctrinating you, those people who have designed to get you wherever you go. If you are a young person who does not watch news, they will get you somewhere else in whatever you are watching. But it's the same message. And the same message has been, Muslims are the enemy. That's what they want you to hear, and that's what they want you to believe. Now, are we witnessing clash of civilizations here? You know, this is the 21st century. Should we even be thinking that way? Well, we should not. But let's listen to Samuel Huntington of what he thinks about this clash of civilization.
TV sets. When President Bush rejected the vision thing, he created a vision vacuum. And he thus provided a great opportunity for social scientists who have rushed in where the president feared to tread and have proliferated visions, models, and paradigms of the post-Cold War world. These include Frank Fukuyama's very imaginative concept of the end of history, a rather conflicting model of Back to the Future, which involves intensifying conflicts between nation states, and an image of the decline of the nation state by the conflicting poles of tribalism or fragmentation on the one hand, and globalism or interpenetration on the other. Each of these images, I think, catches aspects of the emerging reality, some more successfully than others. It is thus with some diffidence and hesitation that I add another picture to this gallery. Yet I am convinced that these other visions miss in some respects crucial and central aspects of what global politics will be like in the coming years. As Chris pointed out, the title of this lecture carries a question mark, which I take seriously, and I hope you will too. I offer not a prediction, but an hypothesis. The issue I wish to deal with is what will be the fundamental nature and source of conflict in this new world. My hypothesis is that it will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. And let me say before I go any further that I don't think I'm entirely alone or original in setting forth this proposition. Max Beloff, my colleague Kishore Mahbubani, Michael Lind, William Lind, Michael Vlahos have all set forth somewhat similar arguments in somewhat different words. They should not, however, be held responsible for my formulation of this argument. Well, what do we mean when we talk of a civilization? A civilization is a cultural entity. Villages, regions, ethnic groups, nationalities, religious groups all have distinct cultures at different levels of cultural heterogeneity. The culture of a village in southern Italy may be different from that of a village in northern Italy, but both will share in a common Italian culture which distinguishes them from German villages. European communities, in turn, will share cultural features which distinguish them from Arab or Chinese communities. Arabs, Chinese, and Westerners, however, are not part of any broader cultural entity. They constitute civilizations. And so I would define a civilization as the highest cultural grouping of people and the broadest level of cultural identity people have short of the human race. Now, civilizations obviously may involve a large number of people, as is the case of China, or a very small number of people, as is the case with the Anglophone Caribbean. A civilization may include several nation states, as is the case with European, Latin American, and Arab civilizations, or only one, as is the case with Japan. Civilizations obviously blend and overlap, and at least one civilization, the West, has two major variants, the European variant and the North American one. Civilizations are nonetheless meaningful entities, and while the lines between them are seldom sharp, they are real. Civilizations are also dynamic. They rise and fall, they merge and divide, and as any student knows, they also disappear. Now, civilization identity, I am arguing, will be increasingly important in the future, and the world will be shaped in large measure by the interactions among 8 or 9 major civilizations. And the most important conflicts of the future will occur along the cultural fault lines separating these civilizations from one another. Now, why may this be the case? First, differences among civilizations are not only real, they are basic. Civilizations are differentiated from each other by history, language, culture, tradition, and most importantly, religion. The people of different civilizations have different views on the relations between God and man, the individual and the group, the citizen and the state, parents and children, husband and wife, as well as differing views of the relative importance of rights and responsibilities, liberty and authority, equality and hierarchy. These differences are the product of centuries, and they will not disappear. And here I guess I would dissent from the very interesting lecture, Chris, which you sent me by V.S. Naipaul, who talked about our universal civilization. When he said universal civilization, however, he meant Western civilization, and I am sure there are several billion people out there who would dispute the label he applies to Western civilization. Second, the world is becoming a smaller place. The interactions between peoples of different civilizations are increasing. These increasing interactions will, I believe, intensify civilization consciousness and awareness of differences between civilizations and commonalities within civilization. North African immigration to France generated hostility among Frenchmen, as well as at the same time an increased receptivity to immigration by good European Catholic Poles. Americans react far more negatively to Japanese investment here than to the larger investments from Canada and European countries. The interactions among peoples of different civilizations thus enhance the civilization consciousness of people, which in turn reinvigorates traditional differences and animosities stretching back into history. Third factor, the processes of economic modernization and social change throughout the world are separating people in some sense from their traditional identities. They also weaken the nation state as a source of identity. In almost every part of the world, religion has moved in to fill this gap, often in the form of movements which are labeled fundamentalist, and such movements are found in Western Christianity, Judaism, Orthodox Christianity, and Hinduism, as well as in Islam. The unsecularization of the world, George Weigel has remarked, is one of the dominant social facts in the late 20th century. And this revival of religion provides a basis for identity and commitment that transcends national boundaries and yet unites civilizations. Fourth, the growth of civilization consciousness is in some sense enhanced by the dual role of the West. On the one hand, the West would appear to be at a peak of power. At the same time, however, and perhaps as a result, a return to the roots phenomenon is occurring among non-Western civilizations. Increasingly, one hears references to trends towards a turning inward and Asianization in Japan, the end of the Nehru legacy and the Hinduization of India, the failure of Western ideas of nationalism and socialism in the Middle East, and hence the return to Islam, and now a debate over Westernization versus Russianization in Mr. Yeltsin's country. A West at the peak of its power thus confronts non-West that increasingly have the desire, the will, and the resources to shape the world in non-Western ways. Fifth, cultural characteristics and differences are less mutable and hence less easily compromised and resolved than political and economic ones. In the former Soviet Union, communists can become Democrats, the rich can become poor, the poor and the poor rich, but Russians cannot become Estonians and Azeris cannot become Armenians. In class and ideological conflicts, the key question was, which side are you on? And people could and did choose sides and change sides. In conflicts between civilizations, the question is, what are you? That is a given, and it cannot be changed, and as we know from Bosnia to the Caucasus to the Sudan, the wrong answer can have deadly consequences.
All right. So very much, his theory is people, these civilizations, are going to be going inward to protect itself from globalization. And therefore, when they do that, then supposedly that is a call for a clash. Now, that was a few years back, by the way, when he spoke those words. And now, if you see what had happened, you might think, well, okay, looks like, he talked about the Arab civilizations, and he did not call it the Muslim civilization, by the way, and because he took like each regions and each countries, like Japan on one hand, China, the Arabs, the Europeans, and the Latin Americans, and the North Americans, etc. So he defined this thing as being the Arab civilization. Now, was there anything with the Arab civilization when he wrote his book? Were there any indications that somehow the North American civilization is going to be at war with the Arab civilization? Of course not. And of course, everything that has taken place since 9/11 until now, it is all designed to accomplish a set goal. Civilizations have nothing to do with it, because the Americans were indoctrinated at, we must go and do that. What does civilization have to do with it? Let's assume that, yeah, it was Al-Qaeda who did that. Al-Qaeda was basically created by the CIA. So we cannot really take something that the CIA created and say, that was the civilization. But since then, a lot has happened. Many people have came together in North America to point at an enemy that was not there, a manufactured enemy. Well, next we are going to actually hear a response from the late Edward Said to what Samuel Huntington has spoke. Now, Edward Said has been dead probably for, I don't know, maybe 7 years or 8 years, maybe a little longer. Let's listen to Edward Said. God bless his soul.
I'm going to start, in fact, talk throughout about an essay and a book written by Samuel Huntington entitled The Clash of Civilizations. When it first appeared in 1993 in the Journal Foreign Affairs, it had a question mark after it. And it announced in its first sentence that world politics is entering a new phase. 3 years later, Huntington expanded the essay, some would say bloated it, to the size of a book without a question mark. The new book is entitled, which was published last year, entitled The Clash of Civilization and the Emerging World Order. My premise is that the essay is better than the book. I mean, it got worse the more he added to it. So I'll concentrate most of my attention on the essay, but make some comments about the book as we go along. Now, what Huntington meant when he said that world politics is entering a new phase was that whereas in the recent past, world conflicts had been between ideological camps, grouping the first, second, and third worlds into warring entities, the new style of politics, which he discerned, would entail conflicts between different and presumably clashing civilizations. I quote him, "The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics." Later, he explains how it is that the principal clash will be between Western and non-Western civilization. But he spends most of his time in the two works discussing the disagreements, potential or actual, between what he calls the West, on the one hand, and on the other, Islamic and Confucian civilizations. In terms of detail, a great deal more attention, hostile attention, is paid to Islam than to any other civilization, including the West. Now, much of the tremendous interest subsequently taken in Huntington's essay, I think, derives from its timing rather than exclusively from what it says. As he himself notes, there have been several intellectual and political attempts since the end of the Cold War to map the emerging world situation, and this includes Francis Fukuyama's thesis on the end of history, which nobody talks about, sort of the end of Fukuyama, really, and the thesis put about during the latter days of the Bush administration, the theory of the so-called New World Order. But there have been more serious attempts to deal with the coming millennium in works by Paul Kennedy, for example, Eric Hobsbawm, less interesting and more rabid, Conor Cruz O'Brien, Robert Kaplan, and a book that's apparently making the rounds in campuses on Jihad versus McWorld by Benjamin Barber. All of these books have done so, have looked at the coming millennium with considerable attention to the causes of future conflict, which has given them all, I think justly, cause for alarm. The core of Huntington's vision, which is not really original with him, is the idea of an unceasing clash, a concept of conflict which slides somewhat effortlessly into the political space vacated by the unremitting war of ideas and values embodied in the unregretted Cold War, of which, of course, Huntington was a great theorist. I don't think, therefore, it's inaccurate to suggest that what Huntington's providing in his work, especially since it's primarily addressed to influential opinion and policymakers, is, in fact, a recycled version of the Cold War thesis that conflicts in today's and tomorrow's world will remain not economic or social in essence, but ideological. And if that is so, then one ideology, the West's, is the still point or the locus around which, for Huntington, all other civilizations turn. In effect, then, the Cold War continues, but this time on many fronts, with many more serious and basic systems of values and ideas like Islam and Confucianism, struggling for ascendancy and even dominance over the West. Not surprisingly, therefore, Huntington concludes his essay with a brief survey, not only his essay but his book as well, with a survey of what it is that the West must do to remain strong and keep its opponents weak and divided. He says, the West must exploit differences in conflicts, I'm quoting now, in conflicts among Confucian and Islamic states to support in other civilizations groups sympathetic to Western values and interests, to strengthen international institutions that reflect and legitimate Western interests and values, and to promote the involvement of non-Western states in those institutions. Now, it's a very interventionist and quite aggressive attitude towards other civilizations to get them to be more Western. So strong and insistent is Huntington's notion that other civilizations necessarily clash with the West, and so relentlessly aggressive and chauvinistic is his prescription for what the West must do to continue winning, so that the reader is forced to conclude that he's really most interested in continuing and expanding the Cold War by other means, rather than advancing ideas that might help us to understand the current world scene, or ideas that would try to reconcile between cultures. Not only will conflict continue, but he says, the conflict between civilizations will be the latest phase in the evolution of conflict in the modern world. It's as a very brief and rather crudely articulated manual in the art of maintaining a wartime status in the minds of Americans and others that Huntington's work has to be now understood. I go so far as saying that it argues from the standpoint of Pentagon planners and defense industry executives who may have temporarily lost their occupations after the end of the Cold War, but have now discovered a new vocation for themselves. But perhaps because Huntington is more interested in policy prescriptions than he is either in history or in the careful analysis of cultures, Huntington, in my opinion, is quite misleading in what he says and how he puts things. A great deal of his argument, first of all, depends on second and third-hand opinion that scants the enormous advances in our concrete understanding and theoretical understanding of how cultures work, how they change, and how they can best be grasped or apprehended. A brief look at the people and opinions he quotes suggests that journalism and popular demagoguery are his main sources rather than serious scholarship or theory. When you draw on tendentious publicists and scholars, you already prejudice the argument in favor of conflict and polemic rather than in favor of true understanding and the kind of cooperation between peoples that our planet needs. Huntington's authorities are not the cultures themselves, but a small handful of authorities picked by him because, in fact, they emphasize the latent bellicosity in one or another statement by one or another so-called spokesperson for or about that culture. The giveaway for me is the title of his book and his essay, The Clash of Civilizations, which is not his phrase, but Bernard Lewis's. On the last page of Lewis's essay, entitled The Roots of Muslim Rage, which appeared in the September 1990 issue of the Atlantic Monthly, Lewis speaks about the current problem with the Islamic world. I quote, this is incredible stuff. It should by now be clear, Lewis says, that we are facing a mood and a movement in Islam far transcending the level of issues and policies and the governments that pursue them. This is no less than a clash of civilizations, the perhaps irrational but surely historic receptions of an ancient rival against our, whenever you hear the word our, you want to head for the exit, against our Judeo-Christian heritage, our secular present, and the worldwide expansion of both. It is crucially important that we, on our side, should not be provoked into an equally historic but also equally irrational reaction against that rival. In other words, we shouldn't be as crazy as they are. And of course, Lewis is very much listened to at the Council of Foreign Relations, the New York Review of Books, and so on and so forth. But few people today with any sense would want to volunteer such sweeping characterizations as the ones advanced by Lewis about a billion Muslims scattered through 5 continents, dozens of differing languages and traditions and histories. Of them all, Lewis says that they are all enraged at Western modernity, as if a billion people were really only one person, and Western civilization was no more complicated a matter than a simple declarative.
Okay, well, that was a response from the late Edward Said to the actually the garbage of the clash of civilizations. But unfortunately, what we are seeing now is not a clash of civilizations, because as Edward Said said, you cannot just lump everyone together as like if you say Christians. Well, Christians are not all the same, and the same thing with the Muslims or even the Arabs. They are not all the same. So, it was silly and stupid, when you have a professor and supposedly a scholar like Bernard Lewis or Samuel Huntington to actually describe people or peoples as one singular with the same ideology, with the same thinking and the same outlook at other civilizations, especially the Western civilization. Even though in many Arab countries, by the way, Western civilization is probably more I guess what you see in those countries is more like the Western civilization. So why did we go to kill people who supposedly are Westernized before we even got to them? Well, because it was not a clash of civilization. You know, many people, if you look at the Arab world, and if you look at things in the Arab world in the last, let's say, 100 years, you will see that the Arabs look much different. They talk different. They have a different civilization than the one probably Samuel Huntington thought they had. And very much so, you know, this thing about that when the Cold War was actually ended, so now we're going to go to the clash of civilizations. No, because the Western civilization had actually invaded those Arab countries long before Samuel Huntington or Bernard Lewis were even born. So all you have to do is just look at some of these movies in the were made back in the 1950s, and you will see how westernized those Arab countries were. Anyway, we're going to have Noam Chomsky actually also respond. Noam's response is only going to be a couple of minutes, and then we will come back and wrap it up.
Now, let's get back to this clash of civilizations thing. Huntington's, you know, everybody is flailing around for some paradigm, you know, some big thing that you can use to control people. And Huntington's idea was clash of civilizations. So, you know, there's Islam and us and all these other things. And the reason why the idea is the reason why the world is so disorderly is because you've got all, you know, with the Cold War going, you've got all these ethnic groups killing each other and so on. Well, as usual, it's always a good idea to start by asking about the facts. Whenever you hear anything said very confidently, the first thing that should come to mind is, wait a minute, is that true? You know, so is it true? I mean, is it true that there's more ethnic conflict now than there was 20 years ago? Well, take a look. In most of the big conflicts that are going on around the world were going on right through the Cold War, like Burundi and Rwanda. There were huge massacres going on in the early 70s. Actually, I wrote about them at the time. Nobody was talking about them because it wasn't interesting, but they were there. There are some, in fact, or take say, you know, in fact, just about every one you pick goes way back. Now, there are some that are new. Those within the former Soviet system, including Yugoslavia, you know, within the old so-called communist system, yeah, they're new. So like the war in Chechnya, or, you know, Azerbaijan, Armenia, you know, Tajikistan, you know, these things are all new. But that's standard. Any time a tyrannical system breaks down, you have all sorts of conflict internal to it. Just take a look at the breakdown of the European empires. Every single one was like that, and most of them were worse. So first of all, the factual basis is very thin. Now, what about the principle, clash of civilizations? Like, say, the big bad guy is Islam. Well, there are a few problems with that. The most fundamentalist Islamic state in the world is our big ally, Saudi Arabia. How's that fit? You know, I mean, Saudi Arabia is a real. It's not fundamentalist enough for some of the people in it, but it's pretty extreme. Are we trying to undermine Saudi Arabia? Of course not. They're sitting on all the oil. You know. In fact, they're our clients. That's a family dictatorship that we keep in power because they make sure that the money from oil doesn't go to the people of the region, but goes to London and New York. So they're okay. There's no clash of civilizations there. That's state fundamental. What about individual, you know, like non-state? Well, by far the worst ones are the guys who are tearing Afghanistan to pieces. You find more crazy Islamic fundamentalists around than them. I don't know about them. Where'd they get their power from? Well, you know, your pocket, you know. They got $6 billion or so, it's claimed, from the United States and Saudi Arabia through the 1980s. Now they're tearing Afghanistan apart, but it's not nothing that we did. We're only wonderful people. So where is this clash of civilizations between Islam and the West? I don't see it. I mean, Indonesia is an Islamic state. Do you see us trying to undermine Indonesia? Yeah. I mean, in a lot of rotten things in Indonesia, like, for example, wages are about half the level of China, which is not so munificent. Do you see us doing anything about that? I mean,
Okay, well, he made a point there that I actually going to rephrase the point about Saudi Arabia. When you think of Islam, if this was really clash of civilizations, Saudi Arabia is probably the most fundamental when it comes to the Islamic culture. If this is a war of cultures, why would the Western culture go and destroy the most visible Western cultures in the Middle East? I.e. the Iraqis, and then they moved on to remove the people and remove the government in Tunisia and Egypt, and killed Gaddafi, and now Syria, to very much strengthen because if you look at it now, you have the Islamists are the ones who are actually coming into power. So if this was a clash of civilizations, the result of this is horrible, because on most of those countries, in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Libya, and if something happens in Syria, will definitely be like part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So what is the clash of civilizations war is supposed to accomplish? Bring Islamists into power and destroy the Western way of life? It can't be. Or was it that Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis, who both are, by the way, well-known Zionists, and did they know something that everybody else did not know? Were they running in circles that they wanted them to actually put that out there, so when it happens, people, not governments, because government normally know what's going on, but so people will think, yeah, this is the clash of civilization or civilizations that Samuel Huntington actually spoke about, which is nothing but garbage, in my opinion. This whole thing is designed, and it was designed and planned a long time ago, to actually do exactly what they are doing, destroy the thing that is called not the Arab civilization or the Arab culture, but destroy this thing called Arabism, which is the thing that was uniting the people, not the government of the Arab world, but this thing that was uniting the people in the Arab world. And the people in the Arab world being like one big chunk, it was not easy for Israel to actually control, and so therefore they needed to divide them. They could not do the job themselves, so the United States, but it took a lot of hard work and a lot of money into indoctrinating you into believing that what you are doing is the right thing, and therefore everybody should get on this same page together and fight this evil called Islam, and because they are the enemy. But that's not the case. I really think they have created a monster within you. They manufactured this hatred within you for a whole religion and a whole people called Muslims and Arabs, and you very much stereotyping what is going on. Anyway, that's all we have for you tonight, and until next week, actually, we will say goodnight, and we'll see you next Thursday. And of course, this gentleman here behind me wants to say goodbye. He could not say it last week, so this is your time. Smile.
Good night.
Good night, and see you
Next Thursday.
There you go. We will see you definitely next Thursday with another episode. And by the way, in the next season, we will probably be going every other week instead of every week. Good night.